Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers Podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the podcast. What are we going to be talking about today, Amanda?
We are talking about returning from travel, long backpacking trips.
Yeah, the thing you have to do at the end of the backpacking trip.
Well, you don't have to do it, but the thing that we've chosen to do at the end of each of our trips. I guess in certain regards, you do have to return at
Inevitably.
some point. Maintain your citizenship and status in your country of birth.
Yeah, and we're going to go through kind of chronologically and look at our thoughts and kind of experiences going through that process. And I'm sure a lot of people will be able to relate kind of to this development of, at first, we just tried to push it as far as we could out of our minds. We're never going home. And then as it gets closer, it kind of gets scary.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's entirely true for me. I think that in our first 6-month backpacking trip, I had sort of waves of periods of feeling homesick and kind of like wishing I was home at times, like never actually getting to a point where I looked at flights or considered like abandoning the trip. But there was definitely periods where I was like, oh, it would be nice to be home right now. I think for me, it was the longest time I'd ever been away from home. I went to university 30 minutes from where I grew up. And so that trip was like very much outside of my comfort zone in that regard. Like home was very much a safety blanket for me. So I think I did feel those feelings like near the end of our trip, but there's definitely points where I was like, oh, I could go home. But then when we actually booked the flight, it was like, I don't want to go, but I kind of want to go, but I don't want to go. Do you know what I mean?
To some degree, I think I had a few times during that 6-month trip had feelings of like, oh, there's people doing something interesting at home. Like, it'd be cool to be there. Or, oh, maybe I could just go home right now. But then once, that was kind of in like the 3 to 4 month range. And then once it kind of got to the real end of the trip approaching, I think I didn't think about that as much. Didn't have those feelings of like wanting to go back as much.
Did you feel excited at all to see like family and friends? Because I know that I felt really tossed between like wanting to go back and then realizing that going back meant all these things that I didn't want to do.
Yeah. So I think the thing for us and at that point in time, my headspace was like, this trip, we just finished university, went off traveling for 6 months. And when we came back, it was like, okay, real life starts now. So there was, in my mind, it was like, oh, this is like a grand vacation for 6 months. And then, it's down to doing whatever, your career for the next however long you're going to do it for.
The next 40 years of your life.
And so I really wasn't, there's all this anxiety around it. I just finished university. I'd only ever worked in part of a family business. So I didn't really have a ton of experience. So I was like, am I going to be able to get a decent job? I don't know. Am I going to be able to do anything that I like doing? All these other kind of big questions and that you don't really want to deal with. Well, at that time, I didn't want to deal with, so I was just trying to put them off because they all existed at the end of the trip.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I know for me too, it was very much like, and we talked about this in one of our more recent episodes called Does Travel Make You a Bad Employee? Where we talk about how our first 6-month backpacking trip was not really intended to set us off on this different life course. And it really did do that, but it wasn't, what we went into the trip intending to do. We were just like, sweet, let's like postpone real life for 6 months and go like have a wicked vacation, like extended vacation. And then we'll come home and we'll like do the thing that you're supposed to do in life, which is like get a job or whatever. But, or whatever.
Get a job or whatever.
Buy a house, make some babies. I don't really know. I do remember though, I think that like friends and family really influenced me. Like I was in correspondence with quite a few good friends, and kind of as we were getting probably into like the 4.5 month mark of our trip, I think is when the questions of like, what are you going to do next started rolling in. And I remember being in probably like halfway through our Asia trip, the Asia part of our trip, and having a conversation with you about whether or not we were going to move in together. And we'd actually decided at that time that we weren't going to move in together. And, that was one of those things that was like, I don't want to be having this conversation. Like, I don't want to think about this when we're having a good time in Asia. Like, let's just deal with this in, 3 months time when we get home. But I felt like this pressure because people were asking me these questions to do things. And, even as it got closer, like pressure to almost start looking for jobs. Like I remember feeling like, oh, I should probably look for jobs, and just being like, I do not want to do this while like I'm in Australia,
Yeah. There's all these big kind of stressful things and emotions related to finishing the trip at that point in time. And we weren't really dealing with those in a very mature way.
I mean, running away from them, just not dealing with them at all. I do remember like booking our flights home at an internet cafe on the Gold Coast in Australia and feeling this weird mix of emotions, like this excitement to see my friends and family that I hadn't seen in so long. And then this kind of like utter terror and anxiety about going home. And I think it kind of became like, I guess maybe like a running joke between us that like, oh, let's just like go to Fiji for Christmas. Like, let's just go to Fiji for Christmas instead of going home. And were you ever serious when you said that, or was it, do you remember?
Yeah. So at that point in time, I think we both were still really bound by a certain set of expectations we had in our mind. Like we needed to be home and go to Christmas, and to do our family Christmas thing. And we needed to go back and, put our resumes out there and find a job. Mm-hmm. And that's something that changed as we went traveling again. We kind of changed what we thought those expectations were.
Yeah, definitely. That's, very true. And it's something that I've thought about quite a bit is like, I think there was a part of me that was like, yeah, Fiji for Christmas sounds good, except like that's actually not an option for me.
Yeah, I think in my mind it was like this alluring escape. Like, oh, what if we could keep doing this and not have it come to an end?
Yeah. Christmas was always really important in my family, and I felt like it just like would not have been acceptable for me to have been gone for 6 months and then to miss Christmas and then to like delay this adult life that I was supposed to be living any further than I'd already delayed it.
Yeah. So what was it like after being away for 6 months? We finally like reckon with going home, and then you show up at home and get reintroduced to your family and friends. What was that experience like? What were the thoughts going through your head?
I mean, like straight up, like it was fucking weird. Like that's the best way to describe it. Like I remember landing in Calgary and it just being like, the same airport that I've flown out every single flight my entire life, and it's the exact same. And we get in my parents' car and they're just like talking in their weird Albertan accents.
Yeah, I remember being accents. We'd spent so long. We did Europe and then being in Australia. So being in Europe, I think it didn't really change as much because you're listening to a lot of people not speaking English. But being in Australia and New Zealand, spending so much time listening to people speak English in a different way, and it becomes normal to you. And then you start hearing Canadian accents for like the first time, really. You're like, wow, you can like really hear it.
Yeah, I don't think I'd ever considered that my parents had accents until that moment that I saw them, and I was like, why are you talking so weird? It was pretty funny. But I don't know, it was just like getting home was very, very strange. Like I had these crazy experiences. Like I hiked the Swiss Alps and I went swimming in the Blue Lagoon in Iceland and rode elephants and bungee jumped and went to these like crazy wild parties. And like, I just feel like my life had like expanded and changed, and I'd seen the world, which I had. And I remember getting home and my mom's like, oh, this is like my new nutcracker that I got for Christmas. And I was like, the fuck? Like, what is happening? Like, it's just so confusing because everything was the same. Like, she'd left my BlackBerry that I had at the time that I didn't take traveling. It was in like the exact same drawer in the bedside table that was the exact same in the room that was the exact same. Like, nothing had changed. And I felt like I was dramatically different.
Yeah. And it's almost this weird effect you get when you're traveling. And it seems like time is, the whole trip does seem to go by quickly, but it seems to have like so much more depth, and it does seem to go be longer in certain ways. In that 6 months, like looking back on it now, it feels like those 6 month trips are way longer.
Than the 2 years in between them.
And it seems like, and obviously this is something to do with your perception of your own life versus other people's perceptions of their lives. But you go away and you feel like so much has changed, like you said, and so much has happened. Like, I've seen 20 countries and had all these experiences and got all this life experience and interesting stuff happening. And you come back and things really haven't changed that much for everyone who's kind of been in a routine.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it. It's like, you know, most of my friends were sort of working the same jobs or doing the same schooling. Not a lot had really changed in that like realm of stuff. So it's like, as I started catching up with friends, it's like, oh, what have you been up to? And it's like, oh, you know, same old. And it's kind of like, you know, 6 months when you're in a routine is so much shorter than 6 months when you're traveling and you're in a new country every single week and you're trying new foods every day and you meet new people and you're staying in hundreds of different places. Like, it is like time changes really. Like, I mean, it obviously doesn't change. 60 seconds is still a minute, and, you know, there's still 24 hours in a day and all that jazz, but it feels so much longer. It feels so much more expansive, so much more like full.
Yeah, well, because you're not on autopilot. So if you're not doing so much stuff just on the habit level, you're actually kind of engaged with what's happening around you.
Yeah, and you're enjoying like more than 2 out of 7 days of your week. I mean, not that everyone hates their day job, but I feel like, I know at least for me, working in the corporate world, I was very much living weekend from weekend. And I feel like 2 years flew by because when you're like, okay, it's Monday, got to get through Monday. Okay, it's Tuesday, one day closer to the weekend. Okay, it's Wednesday, I can start making my weekend plans. And then it's just like countdown till it's Friday, you know? Mm-hmm. It just goes by so much faster than if you're like, sweet, Monday, today I'm in Florence. Like, we're going to do all this cool stuff. Like, Tuesday in Florence, all this cool stuff. Wednesday, going to Rome. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And so for that trip, we had really left. It was like a trip that coincided with a big life change. So we graduated university, moved out of houses with friends, went on a trip, came back. And it was kind of a break between entering into a new lifestyle. So that kind of also changed the experience of coming home a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I was saying before, we talked about how we weren't going to move in together. And then it ended up just like when we actually started looking for apartments, it really wasn't going to like financially make sense to not live together, I guess. And so that was kind of what like spurred our decision to just find one place instead of two. And so that was that's a pretty big life change as well. Like, yes, we spent 6 months together hanging out constantly, but living together is different than traveling together. So that was a big change. Getting like our first corporate big kid jobs was a big shift. And it was, I don't know if you experienced this or, you know, I'd actually be really curious if listeners out there have experienced this coming back from long-term trips, is like, people kind of stop caring about the cool stuff you've done, which makes sense. Like, people aren't always going to be interested in the stuff that's like cool in your life. But I feel like people would be like, oh, how was your trip? What was the highlight? What was your favorite country? What's like the best thing that you did or ate or whatever? And then they would just like continue on as if you hadn't done something cool.
Yeah.
I guess there was a part of me that I don't know. It's like, I didn't want to forget these things. It's like, I wanted to talk about them and share my cool experiences with people. And I found quickly that people don't want to hear all that stuff all the time. They're like, yeah, I get it. You've been there.
Well, some people.
Yeah. So that's why I'd like to know. I'm curious. So any listeners out there, if you've come back from a big backpacking trip, I'm kind of curious what your experiences have been like that. Like, it's not like people were rude or mean, but it's a little bit like, just like, okay, you can stop like talking about how great your life is. Just like, you know, come down to my level sort of thing.
Yeah. So we both kind of encountered that, where we had a few friends who would be like almost negative in a way about bringing up travel stuff, like as if we were trying to like, you know, slap someone in the face, like, haha, we went traveling and you didn't.
Yeah. And so I think that slowly I just kind of made a habit of not really talking about it unless it was actually like relevant to the conversation. And I don't know, it's weird when you...
Well, I mean, that's usually a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's...
But you probably made it more of a habit to not talk about it, even if it was relevant to the conversation.
Yeah. What I was going to say, though, is it kind of almost became like this dream. Like, it's like, oh, you know, I graduated university and then I just like got this job and started working, and I have like this like distant memory of doing something really cool in between there. Maybe.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because it wasn't like that at all for me. It became like a very big like landmark of time. I remember thinking as like, oh wow, 3 months ago I was in New Zealand after 3 months of working, and then 6 months, like, wow, this since we've been back is actually as long as we were traveling for, and it feels so much shorter. Mm-hmm. And then 1 year I was like, wow, like a year ago we were just setting off on a trip and kind of following along a year later, and always thinking back to this in these moments of sitting at work and kind of being like, bleh. Thinking back to my trip, and it was such like a big landmark event that it seemed like my mind went there a lot of the time.
Yeah. Okay. I can kind of like relate to that in a way. Did it ever feel like it wasn't really real though? Or did it always feel like very real to you? Cause I feel like for me, it very much like, it'd be like, oh wow, it's like a year since I was in New Zealand. Like, it feels like that wasn't even a thing I ever did. Like, I feel like I was almost so disconnected from that travel, because I was so like in this like routine, mundane world, trying to find like some fulfillment and joy and happiness day to day, that it was like, oh, did I really do that? Like, that was really cool. Did you find that?
The other thing I'm relating to is this feeling of, I kind of felt like there was this slow transition towards like losing myself as we came back into non-travel life. Mm-hmm. Like, I would feel stressed during the week and then kind of pop back and be like, well, okay, I'm like engaged, I'm here, I'm present on the weekend. And then that would maybe happen every other weekend for a while, and then it didn't happen for like a month or two, and then we'd go on a vacation and be like, whoa, okay, like this is what it feels like to get all this weight off my shoulders. And then it didn't happen again until we like quit our jobs and went traveling again.
Yeah. So something that I was really surprised was the feelings that I felt when I came home from my first backpacking trip, because I'd never really thought about what it was going to feel like to come home. I just thought about what it was going to be like to go. And coming home was very like surreal and confusing and overwhelming. And it was really weird. And I don't know if there was anything that could have prepared me for how weird it was for me. And so something that I thought about when we set out on our second trip was, I guess not thought about, but I had awareness of what it was going to be like to come home a second time. And I feel like coming home the second time was a lot easier because I already knew what it was going to be like.
And so for context, when we went traveling the second time on our second 6-month trip, we also didn't have plans for what was going to happen when we got back. I don't remember talking about it at all.
No.
It kind of, you're just like, fuck it, we're out of here, quit our jobs, going traveling. And I think in my mind, if you had asked me at that point in time, I would have said probably come back to Calgary and get a job again.
Really? Do you think so? I guess we never really talked about it.
I wasn't thinking about it at all, really. And then as the trip progressed, I was also kind of in this mindset, not thinking about the end, really, until some point around like halfway. Maybe, do you remember when we first started thinking about the end of our trip?
I think it was well into the trip, like 4.5, 5 months in, before I remember having a conversation. So just for a little bit more context, and I think we've talked about this on a few different episodes, but things were like plummeting downhill very quickly for us in Calgary. Ryan was suffering from a pretty bad neck injury, and he spent most of his time that was not at work basically like lying on the floor in our apartment. I was like very distracted constantly. Like I wasn't super satisfied in my job. So I was constantly making plans outside of work to try and find like some fulfillment in my life. And like our relationship wasn't in the best place, and neither of us were super happy. Ryan was like quite depressed at the time. And so I feel like both of us were just like, we just need to go. We just need to get away. We just need to like do this thing. And it was so relieving to just like be gone and to not have stuff to worry about and to not have responsibilities to worry about and to not be working anymore, that I feel like, I think had you asked me, I would have just assumed like, okay, yeah, we're going to come back to Calgary and get jobs, I think. But somewhere along the line, it just like, I don't know, it just like didn't seem possible to do that.
Yeah, I think that it was kind of, the last month, the entire time, it felt like after about a month of the trip, we could start to feel the weight coming off our shoulders. And after a couple months, started to kind of dig back into our life in Calgary and think about the things that were going wrong there. And after like 4 months of our trip, we started to kind of look at our relationship and have bigger discussions around that. And then we both kind of connected with the first time we went traveling. We had all these ideas and plans of how we were going to set up our life when we got home. And then it just all kind of like fell apart. And then thinking about, okay, well, we're not going to go back to the way things were before. Like that was just not even possible to continue living that way. So
yeah,
how are we going to change things? And the realization was we're just going to go a completely different course.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with you. The reason why I'm pretty sure it was like well into the trip is I think we were in Bolivia or Peru, which was, well into probably into our like fifth month. Like it was quite a ways into our 6-month trip. And I remember you saying to me, like, I can't go back to Calgary. Like, I don't want to do that again. Like it took, basically 4 months to decompress. We spent so much of our second trip was spent on like personal development and growth in our relationship and kind of digging a little bit deeper, which is not what our first trip was as much about. Our first trip was like, okay, cool. Like we're on this trip. Like, let's just have some fun and like see some cool stuff and see what like awesome stuff can come out of this trip. The second one was like, okay, let's like, like become better people while we're in South America and we've got this time off and we're, spending our savings that we've just like worked so hard for. And yeah, we kind of just landed on like moving to the mountains and getting jobs that were, I don't know, like a little bit less responsibility, I guess. Like, let's just work in customer service and like have a good time. Like, let's see if we can enjoy our lives instead of going back and just like being stressed.
Yeah. And our plan wasn't to do that for a long period of time. But what was our experience like coming home that second time?
So I think that knowing that it was going to be weird, I was like, okay, things are going to be the same. I like knew that from the first time. And then I came back and I was still really surprised by how the same they were. And then I was like, maybe it's just like so the same because I'm so different. I don't know, that I was like contemplating that. Does that even make sense?
No, it doesn't make sense.
Things like felt really like the same, but
When you
I felt
talk about
distance from them.
things, what things are you talking about?
Like everything, like,
Well, so obviously weren't living in the same city, so that's different. Like,
yeah, but we weren't living in anywhere for the first month that we were home.
But are you talking about friends, family?
Yeah, like I distinctly remember coming home and within the first week getting together with some girlfriends that I was close with. And I can't remember if you were there or not, but I felt like there was just like no curiosity about the trip. Like it was just like they'd inserted me back in their world, just like I'd always been there. Like I'd always been there before. Like, so it's just like, okay, cool. Like here's what we do on Fridays, but now like Amanda's home again. And I was like, I feel like this is weird. Like I was like, I'm like not the same person that like left 6 months ago. Like I can't just be this person anymore. And so it was strange. The sameness was strange the second time around again. How did you feel?
Yeah, I remember towards the end of our trip, I had been thinking a lot about my relationships and my social circle that I'd had in the 2 years previous and in university before that, because it was largely the same. And thinking about how I really wasn't happy with myself as a person. I really wasn't happy with the course of my life. So thinking about like how I needed to have kind of probably different people in my life to go the direction that I want to go. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember feeling really kind of like disconnected from the way things were before, our lifestyle of just pretending like everything's fine, repressing all our emotions, going out. It was like, go to work, come home, escape, go to work, come home, escape, go to the, repeat. The weekend, you drink, just try to pretend like your life doesn't make you kind of sick. Yeah, and coming home and being like really kind of feeling quite strongly about like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I don't want to have relationships that are purely about like diversion from a job that I don't like.
Or like from reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So getting home was kind of weird because in some ways I wanted to like completely avoid it. Dealing with these things, like I was like, oh, I'll go somewhere new, continue adventuring, continue changing, and then not really have this like reckoning with like my past self. And then you go home and you see all these people, and I remember at first like having a really positive experience, seeing a whole bunch of people, having lots of people being excited to see you. Mm-hmm. And then deciding to move out of the city and kind of start a new life somewhere else was a good experience.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of interesting because I feel like we were at, I don't know, like it was like not a good time to come home. Like, or at least for me, like I felt like I'd really resisted, like kind of like facing my demons, I guess, or like dealing with the stuff that I needed to deal with within myself and within my relationships with my family and my friends. And it started like really like coming together near the end of our trip. And I remember just like feeling not ready to come home, like really not ready. Like I was like, I'm just not ready. Like I need to be away longer. And it's something we've talked a lot about on this podcast is how, the best sort of growth and development happens when you can separate yourself from your family and your friends who know you to be a certain way. And it's not that you have to separate from them forever if you don't want to. It's just that they know you a certain way, just like you know them a certain way. And you're going to be expected to be that person. And you've got to kind of create a strong precedent if you're going to change who you are. And I felt like I was like making this change, but I wasn't strong with that change yet. I felt like I needed more time.
Yeah. I remember feeling scared a lot that it seemed like we kind of started to turn a corner in our relationship. and just kind of generally with like, okay, we're going to pursue a life that we find fulfilling instead of pursuing a life that's, you know, about having a good position and making money. And we kind of did that in, I don't know, like mid-June. And then
came home beginning of July.
We had like 2 weeks and then we came home. So yeah, I remember feeling quite scared that like, okay, because at the end of our first trip, we had all this good momentum. I remember starting the podcast and looking back at our journals from 2011, and we had both written notes about how we want to live our lives. And then it's like, oh, where did it all go wrong? So I remember feeling after the second trip, like, okay, this kind of state of clear-mindedness about where I want to go in life won't last forever.
Yeah.
And I need to like be careful about the situation I put myself in, because habits and things are kind of going to drag me into a life. So yeah, I remember feeling nervous at that time, but also excited about the new possibilities, because we had decided that we weren't going to be able to live the life we wanted just going back and putting ourselves in the same situation that we were in before. Like we both had open discussions about how the people we wanted to be weren't going to be formed in the exact same social circle in the exact same city doing the exact same things as the people we didn't want to be had been.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely relate to that. And yeah, I felt scared as well. Like, I feel like there was always an expectation sort of on me to like have a good job because, you know, I was good at school and graduated with honors and was like a teaching assistant in my major. And I just feel like there was this pressure for me to, you know, get a good job and do well. And I feel like I've talked about this before, but my brother and I had like a pretty big falling out in the year that we were living in Canmore. And I remember he called me one day and was just like, why aren't you working for an oil and gas company in Calgary? Like, why are you working for Lululemon in Canmore, like hiding out in the mountains? And I was like, this is what you're not getting. Like, I know I could work for an oil and gas company and make 3 times as much money as I make working at Lululemon, but I don't want to do that. Like, I've been shown a life that can be better than that can be more fulfilling for me, and I'm not going back that direction. And I think that that's one of the hardest things about coming home, especially if you decide to change who you were, is that people expect something of you and then they're confused because they weren't there when you decided to change. They haven't experienced the things that influenced you to change.
Decide to change, like if you've changed.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. I mean, okay, yeah, I was going to say change is kind of an active thing, but I guess it's kind of just happens too. It's like once you've seen, you can't unsee what you've seen.
Yeah, and but it is like almost the second time we decided to not come home in a way, and that does kind of stir up. I think it was easier for me in a lot of ways because my family, I was used to me not being around because I had moved to go to university a long distance away, and we weren't that close. But on your side, yeah, you were really choosing to not go home in a way.
Yeah, definitely. And that was hard. Like, family was kind of instilled on me as like a very important value. And I mean, sometimes it is still a hard thing for me where it's like, no, I can't make that family event. Like, I don't live there anymore, or I'm not going to be around. Like, I've kind of chosen a life that's more nomadic, and that's the reality of that. And I think that, you know, I feel like, you know, it's my life. Like, whatever makes me happy is what I'm going to do. But it is interesting thinking about that journal, and it's something that I know I've mentioned in this podcast before in various different episodes. But I remember when we decided to start the podcast, and we started it by going chronologically through our travels. So we started with Iceland and then moved through the United Kingdom, through Spain, blah, blah, blah. And we pulled out our journals to read kind of our mindsets in that time because it'd been a couple of years. And I flipped to the very back page, and it was like, things I've learned while traveling that I want to like take with me into my day-to-day life. And it was all these things that were the exact same as the same list I'd made in 2014. like the exact same things that I wanted to take away from travel. And I was like, I didn't write this in 2011. Like, there's no way that I wrote this. Like, I was so disconnected from that person when we left for our second trip. Like, it was crazy to me that I had that for a small time. And then I like dove into this job that just completely like made me so like disconnected from it. I was going to say shattered my world, but it might be a bit dramatic.
Yeah, no, it is really remarkable how much your perspective changes and like you change as a person. And even ways like you don't realize as you change in that way as you're traveling. And then if you come back at home, like you can feel, I remember we've talked about kind of like post-travel depression and how it's like this slow transition and you kind of notice that like you're not feeling as satisfied, but it kind of like this energy and sense of life that you had kind of drifts away from you slowly. And it's like slow enough that you don't even realize and like don't do anything to catch it.
Yeah.
And it's just like gone one day. And then you have this moment of clarity and you're like, whoa, what happened?
Yeah. I mean, it's really like sad and unfortunate when you put it like that. Something that I found really interesting between coming home the first time and coming home the second time was I feel like because I'd already come home once, I kind of like had this idea. I was like, okay, things are going to be like kind of the same. Like things are going to be weird. I'm going to be overwhelmed. My trip's going to feel surreal. And I felt like I was able to like learn a little bit from that, I guess. Like I was kind of able to be like, okay, like I've done this thing before. Like I can choose to come home in a different way. And I feel like that is what we did. Like we were like, okay, we've done this. We know how this story ends. Like, let's like choose a different story.
Yeah. And it's something that we've thought a lot about is how you can continue to progress as a person and continue to improve and change. And a lot of it does have to do with the people around you. The people around you expect, it depends on the person, of course. But in general, if people are living busy lives and they don't want to see you as this constantly evolving, changing thing, they want to see you as kind of fixed. It's easier. It makes more sense. And it's just easier to keep in your mind. This person is like this. So when you're not like that, people give you all these weird social cues and there's this big social pull to conform and just be the way you've always been. So after you've traveled and you changed, going back into the same situation, there's going to be all this pressure to change you back into the same person you were before. So that moving to a new city after a trip is a real good way to kind of build a foundation for yourself, because all these new people you're meeting they don't know you from the way you were before. They know you as you are, and they will continue to expect you to be as the way you are. So you're almost like taking the travel version of yourself and like setting a foundation by moving somewhere new and meeting new people right after that trip.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely hear that. And I think that that's like what we needed when we were coming back from South America. I don't think that it's necessarily something you have to do. Like, I don't think it's like, if you don't want to lose what you've gained traveling, you need to move to a new place. I think that had we come back confident in the changes we were making and just like set that as the new expectation with the people in our lives, I think that we probably could have made Calgary a happy place for us. I think that where we were at, it probably wasn't necessarily possible, but I think that, you know, it's within the realm of possibility.
Yeah, but I do think that if someone's gone traveling and come to this realization that they really were dissatisfied with the way they were living before and the situations they were in socially and familially, is that a word?
Familiarly? Yeah, I think familially.
Familiarly?
No, that's not a word.
If you come to this realization that you aren't happy with the way things were, where you were, and you want to change, moving to a new place afterwards is going to make that change significantly easier. It's kind of like, there's a thing with addicts, like addicts go away to rehab. And if they go back to the same areas they were in before, the rate of recidivism is way higher than if they just decide to move somewhere new.
Yeah, no, definitely. I get that. And I think that something I've said on the podcast before is that I think that the expectations on me in the city were, you know, that I had a good office job. And I think that it would have been really hard for me to work at Lululemon and be confident with my decision to make $12 an hour and fold stretchy pants for my living. I think that that would have been really hard for me. And I don't know, maybe if it's just where I've gotten to now, but I think that I could go back to Calgary and be that person now. But maybe that's just where I am now. I guess what I was trying to get at is I don't think that somebody has to move. I don't think that that's necessary. It's like, if you want to keep everything you've earned, like had traveling, like don't go back to where you come from. I think that everyone's situation is slightly different, but I think that you do lose some of what you've gained when you enter into the exact same situation, unless you're really confident in yourself and you can be like, no guys, like I don't do this anymore. Like I don't drink, or I do drink, or like I really enjoy art now, or something like that.
I do drink now.
I don't know. Maybe you've got like hipster coffee drinking friends and you're like, oh, sorry guys, I drink wine now for breakfast. I don't know. Whatever it is, like, I just feel like to say, if you want to keep what you've maintained traveling, you need to start your life over in a new place is like a bit of a, I don't think that that's the case for everyone.
Yeah. I don't think that, obviously, that there's a hard, fast rule.
Yeah. Everything's always different.
That's what worked for me.
Yeah, me too.
So let's talk about going on shorter trips and coming home afterwards. Yeah,
so during our time living in Canmore, Ryan and I both decided to take month-long solo trips, which we've done podcast episodes on. Ryan went to Central, sort of Eastern Europe, and I did my yoga teacher training in Bali. And I was actually in Bali this time last year, so that's pretty fun to think about.
For you.
For me. Yeah, I mean, it was weird. It was, so talking about you left first, so let's talk about that first. I felt like it was really weird when you left, and it was really weird when you came home for me. And I just like had stayed put the entire time, like doing my Lululemon stretchy pant folding thing for the whole month.
Yeah. So 1 month is obviously significantly shorter than the 6-month trips we'd taken before, but it's still a pretty long time. Like it's still longer than most people have on vacation in a year.
Mm-hmm. Especially in America.
And it was the first time that I had taken a trip that involved coming back to the exact same place. Like, first trip was leaving university, moving out of a house. So it was coming back, finding a new job, finding a new place to live. Second time, new job, new city, new place to live. This time, exact same place to live, exact same job. So I remember arriving back at the airport and you were picking me up and we were getting into your car very close to where we had gotten out of your car on the way in there, and we were going to go be driving back to the same house, and I was starting at work like 2 days later at the exact same job, and it felt like it didn't happen. It felt kind of surreal, like it was like one of those things where you wake up after a dream and you're like, oh wow, like it felt like that was very deep and long, but
yeah, like that couldn't be my life. Like this is all the same.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of interesting because having traveled before and then having you leave and me stay, I knew that you were experiencing that. Like it was like weird for us to be back together again, and like physically back together again. We weren't like separated in our relationship or anything, but it was like, you know, you form habits so quickly as a human. Like it's like these little habits that I just got into in the month that you were gone that didn't involve you. And all of a sudden you're like back in the space and it's like, oh, right, we need to do things slightly different, you know? And it was like a little bit weird. And I knew that you were experiencing this like sameness having changed, but I hadn't really changed. So it was hard for me to like understand the sameness, yet I did understand it. I don't know. It was weird. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And then so very quickly we shifted and had the opposite experiences. So I think I can relate to what you're saying, because when you're traveling, you've got a lot more time to think and be kind of present with yourself. And when you're at home working while the other person's traveling, it does seem like you're kind of, you have your head down, you're just doing your work, and then like, oh, hey, the person's back again.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, the person.
That's a weird way to put it.
Yeah, whatever. It's a person. I'm a person. You're a person. I think for me, yoga teacher training was something that I'd wanted to do for probably like 3 years before I did it, like really wanted to do. And it's something that had been kind of on my mind for years and years before that, is something that I might do with my life. And so I don't know, it was so surreal for me to come home and be like, I'm a yoga teacher. I can teach yoga. And I started work like directly the next day. And it was like as if I hadn't left. Like, you know, Lululemon's like virtually the same. Like we've hired like 3 new staff that I don't know. Like the color schemes have changed and like the store is slightly different. But other than that, everything's the same. And I remember that like nobody gave me like a rundown on anything that had like gone down in the month that I was gone. They just like shoved me back out like on the sales floor as if I'd been there the whole time. And I was so like, what's happening? Like bright lights and music and lots of people. Like, I don't know if I remember how to do this. And then I just started talking to people and I was like, oh, right. It's like riding a bike. It's just been in my brain the whole time, kind of dormant. But it was weird having this new skill that I came home with. Like, it's like something about my identity sort of shifted on that trip, because I gained this like, okay, I'm a yoga teacher now, but I've never actually taught yoga. So I'm not really a yoga teacher, but I can teach yoga. So I guess I'm a yoga teacher. I don't know. It was very weird.
It sounds confusing.
Yeah. I mean, it was super confusing. It was weird to feel like I'd had this like big sort of identity shift in the month that I was gone, yet I was like the exact same to everyone else, and everything around me was the exact same. Like the sameness when you've changed, I think, is the part that makes coming home the hardest.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Well, I think we've talked about it.
But just like when you said the sameness when you've changed.
So the sameness in like your surroundings, what your friends are doing, what your parents are doing, like the house that you're living in, when things haven't changed in the surroundings that you're coming back to, but you as a person have changed.
And what do you mean by weird? Is it like when you travel and then you come back, it's kind of like your shape's changed, and if you try to fit into the same, it's like you've become a square and now you're trying to fit into your circle that you were before. Yeah,
I guess to a certain extent, that's a good way to describe it. I know weird isn't the best like adjective to use. I just don't have another word for it. Like, what word would you describe the feeling as?
So this last time, only going away for a month, I don't feel like I changed substantially enough that I thought I didn't really like fit into the way things had been before. It just kind of felt like surreal.
I didn't really feel like that coming back from my solo trip either. It's just like a weird change in your like sense of time, because like I was somewhere completely different. So like you're at home and you're like, okay, you kind of remember like the last things you were doing at home, because your memory is kind of related to like the places, and you kind of remember like what your last couple days were like in your house, but that was a month ago. And then you're never seeing the places you've just spent the last month. So they feel like you don't get reminded of them as often. Mm-hmm. So you kind of have to keep reminding yourself you've gone away somewhere. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of interesting too. I feel like when we took trips together, it was like so much easier for us to like reminisce about these experiences we had together. Like, what did you remind me of last night?
Riding on the back of mopeds with our
massive backpacks. Yeah, through the Sierra de Nevada in Colombia. And, you know, it's cool that we can reminisce about that. Whereas like when you take a solo trip, you'll kind of be like, oh, remember that time I went here? But it's like nobody else was, like maybe you have friends that you met or had that experience with, but it's kind of different when you don't have like a travel partner or somebody who is with you in that moment. Like sometimes I think about that, like what would I have been doing right now in Bali? Like, oh, remember that time that, I don't know, I ate an acai bowl at Crate in Canggu, and you're like, no, I wasn't there. Like, I don't remember that time that you did that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of harder to keep those memories, I guess, like afloat or alive in your mind. Like it seems so much more dreamlike when you go by yourself, or you go for a shorter period of time and you come back to the exact same situation. Like that's how I felt. Like, it's like I left Lululemon, I went for 30 days, I came back to Lululemon, and people were like, sweet, yeah, you're back. Like, and it's like, I'd had this like fundamental shift, and like I had this new career option for myself, yet it was as though everything else had not changed.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to touch on about coming home from a trip?
I don't think so. I feel like we've kind of like grappled with it quite a bit. I think that if anyone else has had any experiences coming home that have felt, as we're describing, weird or different or shocking, or they've been difficult and you've experienced post-travel depression, we'd really love to hear from you. It's always nice to hear from listeners who can relate to the things we're saying, especially such a broad topic where it's like, it's very gray. Like there's not really any black and white, and it's kind of more discussion like. So if you do want to reach out to us, it's info@theworldwanders.com, or you can contact us on our contact page at www.theworldwanders.com.
Yeah. So. And we've got a short and concise guide to South America on our website. If you go on to the website, it'll ask you if you want it, and then you can download it.
Beep, 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 beep. That's you putting in your email address. All right. Ciao.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanders.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanders.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanders or on Twitter at WorldWanders1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.